You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna. The British government is proposing a minimum price of 45p per unit of alcohol. It's an attempt to tackle problem drinking, with the Home Office saying that the minimum price will reduce alcohol-related crime and alcohol-related health problems. The government is also considering banning multi-buy promotions in supermarkets, such as 2-for-1 offers on cider and beer. So what would that mean in real terms? Wine would cost a minimum of £4.22 a bottle. Strong cider would cost at least £1.66 a can, while a litre of vodka would retail for a minimum of £16.88p. The Home Office say the measures are aimed at changing the behaviour of problem drinkers and irresponsible shops. But critics, including the British Retail Consortium, say the controls are unfair and penalise the majority, who are responsible drinkers. Joining me for a discussion on minimum alcohol prices are Campbell Evans, Director of Government and Consumer Affairs at the Scotch Whisky Association. Andrew Langford is Chief Executive of the British Liver Trust. Chris Snowdon is a Fellow from the Adam Smith Institute and a co-author of a report on minimum alcohol pricing. And Dr John Middleton is Vice President for Policy at the UK Faculty of Public Health. We'll begin with Dr John Middleton, Vice President for Policy at the UK Faculty of Public Health. Should we introduce a minimum price for alcohol?
Well, absolutely, yes. We, in the Faculty of Public Health, we have supported this policy for 3 years, and we think that the time has come to do something about the appalling alcohol-related harms that we see in relation to crime, in relation to the growing health problems that we're seeing. And since we're told that we're shackled by what we can do in terms of international taxation, the minimum price does offer an alternative route that will reduce the harms in the worst affected or the most addicted and in young people starting drinking.
Campbell Evans from the Scotch Whisky Association.
We're totally opposed to minimum pricing, and I don't actually understand the point that was made about taxation, because taxation is the one legal way of doing this. But the Scotch Whisky Association opposed it for 3 grounds. One is we don't believe it will be effective, and indeed the government's own figures show that it won't reduce the number of harmful and hazardous drinkers, and it won't stop young binge drinking. So it doesn't actually solve the problem they say they want to solve. We also believe it's illegal, and for 30 years the European Court of Justice has ruled against it and said that minimum pricing on a range of products is not acceptable under EU trading rules, nor indeed under the World Trade Organization. Thirdly, we also believe that if this were allowed, it would be the first time ever that international trade was allowed to be disrupted for a health barrier to trade, and that would count against us in our exports and therefore against the UK economy.
We'll come back to those 3 later on, but Chris Snowdon, what are your thoughts about introducing a minimum alcohol unit price?
Well, we at the Adam Smith Institute are very concerned about the implications for the free market. Prices are generally considered to be better when they're lower. If drink prices are low, then people have more money to spend on other things. The problem in this country, if anything, is that drink is usually too expensive. In France, for example, the duty on a bottle of wine is 2p. In this country, it's more like £2. So we have a policy here which is going to hit the poor hardest. It's going to be very regressive. And it's also going to give a key lever of competition over to the medical temperance lobby. And I don't see any reason why they won't just want to put that up and up and up indefinitely.
And Andrew Langford from the British Liver Trust.
I mean, we very much support a minimum unit price, but mainly from a health perspective is that we are seeing increasing numbers of people dying of liver cancer due to alcohol consumption. And 50 pence would certainly stop some of the harmful drinkers drinking as much as they do. Whether the government goes with 45p or 50p, it would be a step in the right direction. And just picking up on what Campbell was saying, I think it's very important that we take a big step forward in protecting people's health.
The British Retail Consortium say this is just an attack on responsible drinkers.
Well, it won't affect responsible drinkers that much. It'll be a minimum amount more that most moderate drinkers will have to pay. However, it will make it harder for particularly for young people to buy and drink cheap booze. And also for those that are drinking to very harmful levels, it should reduce the amount that they're drinking.
Campbell Evans from the Scotch Whisky Association, it's not going to affect responsible drinkers.
Well, given that the 70+% of alcohol in the off-trade is going to become more expensive, it's going to hit everybody across the board. So this is going to actually not target the people we need to reach. It's actually going to hit everyday shoppers at a time when their salaries are not going up, when they're finding their household budget squeezed. And if you read what the government have said last week when they put out, their own impact assessment shows that this will not hit 18 to 24-year-old binge drinkers, which is who the people they're trying to reach. If you look at the other impact assessments, it says it's not going to reduce the number of harmful and hazardous drinkers. It's not reaching the targeted people we need to reach. We need to do this smarter, and we need to reach those who we need to reduce their drinking.
Dr John Middleton from the UK Faculty of Public Health, is there a smarter way to do this?
Well, I'd just like to pick up and clarify maybe the point I was making about taxation, because the biggest single predictor of how much people drink is the cost. And in the last 10 years, we've seen the real price of alcohol in this country fall by 70%.
That's not true.
It's very much more accessible, and the accessibility, of course, is the other factor. And for many years, people have complained about the Chancellor's hikes on taxation for alcohol, and it is the case that those do hit across the board. It's not just problem drinkers, it's everybody, and therefore the approach to a minimum unit price is designed to address that problem and to try and ensure that one is not just doing across the board, but one is targeting problem drinkers and the young who are particularly affected. And there is evidence now that whatever people say in criticism of the modelling, that actually it's working. It's working in parts of Canada, in Saskatchewan, in British Columbia. So the implementation of it has actually reduced consumption of the heaviest and the hardest and the most dangerous poisons that we have, the very strong alcohols.
Chris Snowdon from the Adam Smith Institute.
Well, it's just not true that prices have dropped in real terms, and it's a shame that some of these medical people who are campaigning for this don't know a little bit more about economics. They have not fallen in real terms. They may have become more affordable as a result of people becoming much wealthier since about 1980, but since 1980 the price of alcohol has gone up 24%. Alcohol is almost more expensive in this country than almost anywhere in the world. There's only a few parts of Scandinavia and Ireland where alcohol taxes are higher. If ripping off drinkers was the way to reduce the harms from alcohol, there shouldn't be any harms from alcohol in this country because we pay a vast sum of money for our alcohol taxes. The correlation between affordability of alcohol and alcohol-related harm, and indeed alcohol consumption, is not particularly strong. If you look across the European countries, there is no correlation whatsoever between affordability and consumption, nor is a relationship between affordability and harm. Now, if you increase the price of something, of course, all other things being equal, we would expect consumption generally to drop. But this ignores the issue of price elasticity. And the heaviest and most hazardous drinkers have an elasticity of pricing which is almost zero, which is to say they will spend any amount of money. They will find the money from somewhere to buy their alcohol. And you only need to look at the most desperate alcoholics we have in this country and most countries, which of course is the homeless, and they are buying these very cheap and very strong drinks. There's no doubt about that. But what is their affordability of alcohol? They essentially have no money, and what they do have, they spend on alcohol. And
I want to come back to some other ways that you might suggest that we could better tackle this, but research by Sheffield University showed a drop in consumption levels when we saw an increase to 45p or even 50p.
No, it didn't. It's a model. It's a computer model. It's not based on anything ever happening. It's based on various assumptions that are put into the computer. And if you tell the computer that by increasing price you're going to reduce consumption, and if you tell the computer that by reducing consumption you'll reduce harm, then naturally you're going to get the result that you want to find. But it's not by any means inevitable that increasing price reduces either consumption or harm.
And they also look at demographics and societal changes. So therefore they're not actually able to say what the difference will be in terms of targeting the people we need to reach, in terms of who's buying what and what will change. So if responsible drinkers, moderate drinkers stop, and you don't reduce the number of people who are drinking too heavily, which would seem to be what they're suggesting, then we haven't solved the problem.
A reminder that you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Daniel Cinna. Joining us for a discussion on minimum alcohol prices are Campbell Evans from the Scotch Whisky Association, Andrew Langford from the British Liver Trust, Chris Snowdon from the Adam Smith Institute, and Dr John Middleton from the UK Faculty of Public Health. Let's go back to Chris Snowdon. What were the other ways that we might be better at tackling problem drinkers?
Well, I mean, one way that I think would make more sense, certainly, than this would be to tax alcohol based on the units itself. So you would tax the units rather than the type of drink. Now, this would be very different to minimum pricing because you wouldn't be putting it at 45p. You're not trying to dictate the price of the product as such, but you are just trying to get some sort of level playing field amongst different categories of alcohol. So, for example, at the moment, wine is very overtaxed, cider is very undertaxed because there are lobbying interests within the country. It would make some sense to increase the tax on cider by taxing each unit. Because a lot of the strong ciders are drunk by some of the most problematic drinkers. The reason that probably won't happen is that the West Country is a big producer of cider and there's lots of important Tory and Lib Dem seats there.
Under the new minimum units of alcohol, you would see a bottle of wine costing at least £4.22. Under your regime, how much would it cost?
Well, it wouldn't be set at any particular price. It would be basically down to the free market, but there would be a certain amount of tax. At the moment, it's about 45% of a bottle of wine. Average bottle of wine is taxed, about £2. I wouldn't try and set the price for things, and I don't believe in setting the price for things. I want all products, whatever they are, to be cheap, to leave more money in people's pockets. But it would be a level playing field amongst different categories of alcohol. So you would be taxing in more of a fair way rather than the way that is deliberately trying to help certain industries because they're in useful places politically.
Of course, the government said that's what they were originally going to do. They were going to have a tax-based floor price. So they can easily go back to looking at that, and that would certainly be what the European Commission has said they should do it through taxation. Let's
bring in Andrew Langford here, Chief Executive of the British Liver Trust. What are your thoughts about what you've just heard from Chris Snowdon?
Well, what we've agreed is that when alcohol is cheaper, people drink more. Therefore, more people will do harm to their livers and other organs in their bodies. And that's the biggest issue, is that one of the things that we can prove is, and as was released by the Chief Medical Officer only over a week ago, is that we have an increasing number of deaths due to liver disease caused by alcohol harm. And any step in the right direction has got to be a move forward.
Dr John Middleton, Vice President for Policy at the UK Faculty of Public Health. What about ways of tackling crime? We've already heard about health-related problems. The Home Office seemed quite convinced that this is going to help tackle that type of crime.
Yeah, and, I think, Chris used the word affordability, and in addition to affordability, it is accessibility, of course. And it's interesting that the supermarkets have been more critical of this move than pubs have. And, we could, we've got young people who are preloading with alcohol that they've got hold of cheaply in supermarkets. We've got, and then going out and making our inner cities, town centres, unlivable for anybody else at night. So, we need a restructuring and a change in culture. Certainly, we need, a range of approaches. Certainly, the minimum price is not the only thing.
So, an extra 5p is really going to change people's behaviour.
Well, it may be only 5p, but it's then it's multiplied up every time anybody has a drink, isn't it? And we are seeing whilst it may be the case that overall alcohol consumption has been coming down, that we are seeing quite astonishing levels of alcohol consumption by young people.
That is absolutely not true. I don't know where you get these figures from. Between 16 and 24-year-olds, the alcohol consumption has dropped by half in the last 10 years.
Yeah, well,
it's dropped amongst them as a whole. I mean, the trouble with this debate is the premise of it is that we have a mounting crisis of alcohol abuse in this country, and particularly amongst young people. And the facts are the complete opposite of that. We're living in a fantasy world dealing with a problem that has been on the decline for the last 10 years. Alcohol consumption's fallen by about 15% since 2004. Young people's drinking and smoking and drug-taking habits have all collapsed, really. I mean, the biggest decline we've ever seen. in the last 10 years. So what exactly is this problem we're trying to address it?
The government seem to think there is a problem with alcohol-related crime. However,
well, they will, because the Daily Mail perpetuates this myth, and the medical temperance lobby perpetuate the myth that things are getting worse and worse.
Solely on the Daily Mail, would they?
Well, it's the biggest selling newspaper in the country, so people read it, and they're very much influenced by it.
I've been in meetings where Home Office officials said, how do we get the perception out there, the reality out there rather than the perception? Because they see the figures that Chris sees, and they're frustrated that people aren't recognising it, and that's what we need to accept. I need to build on. If people are drinking less, and certainly in the figures that came out of Scotland yesterday, we saw harms are coming down, people are getting the message, the world is changing, we need to build on that and actually say to people, if you're not part of this journey, if you're still misusing alcohol, you're not actually understanding what's going on, you're not part of that social norm that we need to build on.
So you don't think there's any problems with alcohol-related crime at all?
We've always said that we need to address alcohol misuse. We've been doing that for 40 years in the Scotch Whisky Association. We're in partnership with the government north and south of the border to find ways of tackling that. So we've got no problem in trying to get to the people who are drinking most heavily and get them to drink less.
If you're looking across the border in Scotland, they're now proposing next year a 50p minimum target for alcohol units. You must be very worried about that.
It won't be coming in next year. It won't be coming in for 2 or 3 years. And indeed, it's important to remember that the UK government is involved north of the border as well. The legal action which is taking place north of the border involves the UK government and the Scottish government. That will be heard in January in the Scottish courts. However, there is an undertaking by the Scottish government that they will not bring in minimum pricing until all the legal processes are complete. And that could take 2 or 3 years yet. So minimum pricing will not be coming in anytime soon north of the border. We also need to recognise that there is a investigation, a notification to the European Commission, and they have written back and said to the UK as the member state, if you go ahead with this, you have to expect that we will take you to the European Court of Justice because minimum pricing is illegal. You can protect the health of your citizens, no problem with that. We accept the principle of improving the health of your citizens and tackling alcohol misuse, but you must do so through legitimate legal means, and that's taxation.
Why do you think they want to bring in a 50p?
Well, what they've had to do is to try and overcome the fact that the rules say you can't bring in a barrier to trade, and they are saying that at 50p they believe that they can make a health argument to set aside trade rules. The Commission have quite clearly come back and said that doesn't wash.
It will reduce the level of liver-related deaths. It will reduce the amount of crime that we see in our cities. And I don't think 1 million alcohol-related crimes is an insignificant amount. And I don't know if either of my 2 colleagues spend a lot of time in the centre of any of our towns and cities after 7 o'clock at night, because a lot of the responsible drinkers, a lot of the moderate drinkers, don't do that in the context of a nighttime economy and an entertainment environment that we might have expected for our cities. So the point about the laws, I think it's quite clear the challenge that has been made to the Scottish proposals. I say bring it on. Really, let's have those legal judgments. I think there's also the question in Europe about proportionality, and I feel that what is being proposed in Scotland for the 50p level is proportional. The level of harms that we're accepting for our people on the basis that somehow the alcohol industry has a bigger right to sell its product than, say, any other unfettered and undistorted, I think is completely fallacious, really.
Let's bring in Andrew Langford, Chief Executive of the British Liver Trust. You obviously welcome the 45p minimum alcohol unit, but what about a 50p one?
We don't welcome a 45p and would like to see at least 50p. And in terms of what that will actually mean is, along with the Alcohol Health Alliance, what we accept is that a 50 pence minimum unit price would prevent more than 3,000 alcohol-related deaths in England and up to 40,000 crimes. So, if we're talking about, what does 50 pence minimum unit price actually mean, it means for us, in terms of liver health, at least 3,000 less deaths.
A reminder that you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Daniel Cinna. Joining us for a discussion on minimum alcohol prices are Campbell Evans from the Scotch Whisky Association, Andrew Langford from the British Liver Trust, Chris Snowdon from the Adam Smith Institute, and Dr John Middleton from the UK Faculty of Public Health.
Anyway. Can I also just say in relation to the alcohol-related harms that when we talk about heavy drinking as being 50 units a week, we're not actually talking about necessarily people who are going to go on to get cirrhosis. We're talking about people much more commonly who will be affected by high blood pressure and by the risks of cardiovascular disease that go with that. So, there are alcohol-related deaths at a much higher level that are not simply cirrhotic livers, and that people who are drinking at that 50 units plus level are not homeless people on the streets who will only spend their money on alcohol. They are people who are in a position where they can adjust their behaviour and their consumption, and that is where we think the majority of that effort with heavy and harmful drinking will impact.
Chris Snowdon, you want to come in?
You heard from the chap at the British Liver Trust there. He wants 50p or more. It will go up and up. I mean, the Sheffield model goes up to 70p, and at that rate, it claims that 62% of all alcohol-related deaths are going to disappear, which is frankly risible. It will go up and up and up. If you give the main lever of competition to the temperance lobby, and we have a growing and resurgent temperance lobby in this country, represented by you two other guests here, and they are very much following the anti-tobacco blueprint. They want to ban all advertising for alcohol. They want to put the price up as much as they can. They want to reduce the availability of alcohol. All exactly the same things as you would have seen in the Victorian 19th century temperance movement, and you've seen more recently with the anti-smoking movement. I don't think that drinking should be seen as the new smoking. I think that we pay enough for our alcohol in this country. We are the people. We decide how much we want to drink, and we shouldn't be ripped off by what is a stealth tax without the tax. And that's the crazy bit. It's not even going to make any money for the government. It's just taking money off people just to inconvenience them.
The British Retail Consortium said this is up to personal responsibility now. It's up to people to take their own individual choices. Would you agree with that?
Well, entirely.
But what about people that are dependent then?
Well, the people who are dependent will obviously keep on drinking at any price, and this is the problem. You just make them poorer and poorer, and they'll cut down their heating allowance and on their food budget.
You said the homeless people were the people most likely to be problem drinkers. Surely if we hit a certain level, they're going to go, whoa, I can't afford this anymore.
They'll go back to drinking meths, which is what they used to do years ago, before these strong ciders came out. In any society, you will have about 5% of the population who are dependent on alcohol. And that really doesn't change, no matter what the price is, what the availability is, how much advertising there is. You always have a small minority of people who have problems with it. And there are very good services in this country and very good charities who look after people and give people support, and we have rehab and so on. But the idea that we can make that 5% disappear using fairly crude policies is delusional, and it's going to exact an enormous cost on the majority of people who drink responsibly.
Campbell Evans, is there a worry here that with higher prices we might see an increase in smuggled alcohol and also counterfeit alcohol?
Well, we're already seeing counterfeit alcohol in some sectors due to the taxation policies we have here. If we were to bring minimum pricing, that would give a greater encouragement to organised crime, because the margins would be that much greater. So we would certainly be creating the circumstances for that to happen. I certainly agree with Chris. People might turn to other things. I just think this policy is not designed to do what it says on the tin, and we should start to target better, and we should stick to where we are.
Andrew Langford, that's pretty damning words from Campbell Evans. We could see an increase in smuggled and counterfeit alcohol.
Well, I think we've got to take other actions to make sure that that doesn't happen, and doesn't take away the fact that there is still a lot of health harm done by the legal alcohol that is bought in this country.
But we're talking about creating the conditions in which we could see an increase in counterfeit alcohol. We're talking about products which should never be consumed by a human.
I think that unfortunately is happening at the moment. I think we need to take other measures to make sure it doesn't. But what we mustn't allow is for that to become a smokescreen to actually pushing forward better measures like a minimum unit price, to safeguard people's health.
Dr John Middleton?
Yeah, I mean, we must get away from this notion that we don't regulate and control for people's health in this country. We don't allow people to poison us with infected and substandard food. We don't allow dangerous cars. We do tax bigger cars and we don't allow a certain whole category of other drugs. So, we do have regulation, we do have enforcement, and we shouldn't make this policy to change the pricing of alcohol to detract from what needs to be done to prevent illegal and smuggled alcohol.
And we have some of the highest taxes in the world. I have people that come from all around the world and say, why is Scotch whisky so expensive in this country? It's much cheaper back home. So if pricing was the answer, we'd have already solved the problem.
Can I just say to that? I mean, people often compare us with France, for instance, and whilst it's true we have more expensive alcohol than France, the reality is that the price of alcohol in France has been going up, and that it may in part be an element of culture as well, but that the consumption of alcohol has gone down in France, and their liver cirrhosis rates are now lower than ours. We've gone from being a sort of exemplary model of liver health in this country to being the worst in Europe, and it's because we haven't really got any levels of control at all on our alcohol marketing or the way that people have it accessible and affordable, and we have to do something to control that.
Chris Snowdon from the Adam Smith Institute. The worst livers in Europe?
Well, we haven't got the worst livers in Europe. I think the rates of liver disease are fairly average, but that, maybe that's because our rates of alcohol consumption are fairly average. Finland and Ireland, two of the few countries that have higher alcohol taxes than us, have much, much higher rates of alcohol consumption, and indeed rates of many alcohol-related diseases. The correlation between price and consumption and harm really is not clear-cut. There are so many other factors at work, culture being one of them. It's very boneheaded and simple to look at this as being an issue about price and availability. That's how Puritans and Prohibitionists have always looked at these kind of issues. That if you can't see them, if they're not advertised, if you're not seduced by this clever marketing, then you won't do it. You'll go off to church and drink water. It's not the way it happens. We had this huge brouhaha 8 or 9 years ago about the so-called 24-hour licensing laws. Alcohol consumption fell the year it came in. It was supposed to be bedlam on the streets and everyone was going to die and it was going to be like the last days of Rome. Nothing really happened. Pubs opened a bit longer, clubs opened a bit longer, everyone had a better time, but there was actually a decline in alcohol consumption during that period. I don't know what the government think they're doing with this policy. The reception to it amongst the public seems to be almost universally negative. Many politicians are against it, including on the Tory benches. It's making people poorer at a time when wages have already gone back to the levels about 2005. Everybody's feeling the pinch. And as I say, it's a stealth tax without even the benefit of raising government income.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time for today's discussion on minimum alcohol pricing. Joining me were Campbell Evans from the Scotch Whisky Association, Andrew Langford from the British Liver Trust, Chris Snowdon from the Adam Smith Institute, and Dr John Middleton from the UK Faculty of Public Health.